Adrian Cole had built his life on precision. Every decision timed to the second, every plan executed with mathematical accuracy. At 35, he was the kind of man people described in headlines rather than conversations. Billionaire CEO of Coltech Innovations, genius of artificial intelligence, master of algorithms that could predict the stock market before dawn. Yet on that gray Manhattan evening, the algorithm of his own life faltered. The migraine had begun, as a faint pulse behind his eyes during a meeting with investors. And by the time the city lights bled through the tinted glass of his car, it had become a steady hammering beat. He dismissed his driver at the private elevator, preferring the illusion of solitude. The penthouse greeted him with its usual sterile silence-polished stone, reflecting the glow of the skyline. It was not a home, but a fortress designed for a man who no longer trusted warmth. He loosened his tie, stepped into the vast living area, and realized the study light had gone out. The blackout was minor, a tripped circuit perhaps. But for Adrian Cole, even inconvenience felt like chaos. He remembered the building manager mentioning that the main electrical panel was near the staff quarters. He rarely went there. That part of the penthouse existed in the periphery, maintained by invisible hands. One of them belonged to the new live-in housekeeper, Maria Alvarez. He barely knew her name, though he had approved her background check from the agency. Young, early 20s, quiet, polite, nothing remarkable, except her efficiency. Night, he only wanted to fix the light and retreat into silence. He walked down the corridor, his footsteps echoing against marble, the pain throbbing behind his temples. The door at the end was slightly ajar light, spilling out in a soft golden strip. He pushed it open, expecting wires switches, a fuse box. Instead, the world stopped. The room was small, neat, a private space, scented faintly of laundry soap and lavender. And in the center of it stood Maria, her back turned, half undressed. The simple uniform lay folded on the bed beside her, and the lamplight traced the delicate curve of her shoulder blades, the vulnerable slope of her spine. For a heartbeat, he could not move. His breath caught the sound loud in the hush. She hummed quietly to herself a melody fragile as glass. Then, sensing him, she turned. Their eyes met. The look on her face shattered something inside him. It was not seduction, it was pure terror, the instant knowledge of violation, not physical but spiritual, the awareness of being seen when she had not chosen to be. Her hands flew to the cotton shirt, pressing it against her chest. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I am sorry, sir, I did not know you were here." The apology broke him. He had been the intruder, yet she was the one begging forgiveness. Adrian stammered, "It was a mistake, I am sorry," and stepped back, the words collapsing under the weight of the moment. Her cheeks flushed to deep crimson, eyes wide shimmering with humiliation. He turned away, closing the door softly, as if the sound itself might wound her further. The hallway air felt colder, sharper. He stood there, hand still on the doorknob pulse, racing not from desire, but from something far worse, shame. In that single accidental instant, he had seen not her body, but her defenselessness, the kind that only exists in people who have never been granted protection. He walked away, but the image followed him through the apartment like a ghost hovering at the edges of his thoughts. The migraine dissolved, replaced by a hollow ache that logic could not diagnose. He tried to rationalize it, just a mistake, an unfortunate coincidence, nothing more. Yet when he poured a glass of water, his hand trembled slightly. He sat in the dark living room city lights, flickering across the floor, and saw her again in his mind, shoulders drawn inward, small and terrified. He realized he had not spoken gently to anyone in months, perhaps years. The silence of the penthouse pressed in heavier than usual, as if the building itself demanded accountability. He thought of the girl living quietly beyond that hallway, earning less in a month than he spent on a dinner for clients, and still carrying herself with diligence. She would not tell anyone, he knew that instinctively. Her kind never did. They endured in silence because survival required it. He ran a hand over his face, exhaled deeply, and told himself it would pass. But when he closed his eyes, that fragile melody she had been humming returned. It drifted through the darkness like an unanswered prayer, and Adrian Cole, a man who believed emotion to be inefficient, felt the first stir of something unfamiliar. Guilt. Morning sunlight cut through the glass walls of the penthouse, revealing a world engineered for perfection and emptiness. Adrian Cole stood by the window, coffee untouched, watching New York move far below him. The city was alive, chaotic, unpredictable, everything he had spent his life mastering. Down there were people who hurried missed trains, argued, loved while he stood apart. Inside his sterile tower, insulated by success, the silence after last night felt heavier, more deliberate. He had not seen Maria since the incident, though he knew she must have risen early, performing her duties with the quiet efficiency that left no trace. It was the way she existed in his world, invisible yet essential. Adrian told himself the best course was to ignore it, maintain professionalism. But professionalism had never collided with conscience before. He turned away from the skyline to the gleaming kitchen, where every surface reflected light like an accusation. His assistant had left a schedule on the counter filled with meetings, calls, and deadlines. The day would continue as always, yet the order of it felt absurdly fragile. Across town, in a cramped apartment in Queens, Maria Alvarez buttoned her faded sweater, hands still trembling. Her reflection in the mirror showed dark circles beneath her eyes, and the same question looping endlessly. What if he fires me today? Her mother's voice called from the next room, asking if she had eaten, but Maria lied, said she had. She had left El Paso 2 years ago, dreaming of a stable income to send home for her younger siblings. New York was harsher than she imagined, the hours long, the clients demanding. The agency had told her Coltech's penthouse would be an honorable placement. They say he's quiet, never home, never trouble. The supervisor had promised, and it was true until last night. She could still feel the heat of humiliation on her skin. It was not the exposure itself, but the powerlessness of being seen by a man like him. Men like Adrian Cole did not make mistakes in her world. They gave orders, and the rest obeyed. By mid-morning, she took the train back to Manhattan, rehearsing apologies she would never say. She entered through the service elevator, moving like a shadow through marble halls. Every sound seemed amplified: the click of her shoes, the hum of air vents, the distant city sirens. Adrian heard her faint footsteps before he saw her. He was in his office reviewing data charts on a transparent screen, yet none of it registered. He told himself not to look up, but he did, and the sight of her only deepened the ache inside him. She was smaller than he remembered, slight-framed hair, pulled back in a simple braid, her uniform pressed immaculate. She avoided his gaze, moving efficiently from room to room, collecting glasses, dusting shelves, placing fresh lilies in a vase. There was dignity in every motion. He wondered what it cost her to keep working here after last night. His phone buzzed a reminder of a virtual conference with investors, but he ignored it. For the first time in years, he let the schedule slide. In his mind, he compared their lives, his built from logic, hers from endurance. He thought about how little he knew of people beyond quarterly reports and profit margins. He had reduced humanity to variables, productivity percentages, loyalty scores. Yet Maria was none of those things. She was the anomaly in his perfect formula, the reminder that life could not be optimized without losing its soul. Later that afternoon, Maria paused by the window to adjust the blind sunlight warming her face. For a second, her eyes lifted, meeting his reflection in the glass. She looked away instantly, murmuring a polite, "Excuse me, Mr. Cole," and hurried out. The small tremor in her voice unsettled him more than any boardroom failure ever could. When the door closed, Adrian sat back, realizing how profoundly separated their worlds were by class wealth and expectation. He lived surrounded by art worth millions, yet felt poorer than the girl who scrubbed his floors. That evening, Maria returned to her small room, tucked behind the staff corridor. She wrote a letter to her mother describing the skyline at night and the kindness of strangers on the subway, omitting the shame that kept her awake. She promised to send money soon for her brother's textbooks. Her handwriting wavered at the thought of losing this job, but she folded the letter carefully, as if order could protect her from uncertainty. In his own way, Adrian tried to restore order too. He attended a charity dinner, smiled for photographs, shook hands. Yet his mind stayed elsewhere, haunted by the image of her bowing in apology. When he returned to the penthouse near midnight, he paused outside the same hallway where everything had changed. A faint light seeped from under her door again, but this time he did not move closer. He stood there listening to the distant sound of soft humming, the same tune as before, fragile but steady. Two worlds coexisted under the same roof, one built on fear, the other on guilt. Neither understood how to bridge the distance. In that fragile equilibrium of silence and remorse, both lived their separate routines, each pretending nothing had happened, while the memory pulsed quietly between them like an unspoken truth, waiting for its reckoning. Adrian Cole had always believed guilt was a useless emotion, an obstacle to efficiency, a sign of weakness that men in his position could not afford. Yet in the days following that night, guilt became a constant breathing presence inside his meticulously ordered world. It waited for him in the quiet hours before dawn, when even the city's perpetual hum seemed to fade. It followed him into meetings where voices droned about market expansions, but all he heard was the echo of a soft gasp, the fragile sound of Maria's shame. He could not rationalize it away. Logic failed him in the face of something purely human. For the first time, his empire of certainty felt meaningless. He found himself watching the penthouse cameras late at night, not to monitor security, but to ensure she was safe. When he realized how invasive that was, he turned them off entirely, the first rule he had ever broken for another person. In the mornings, he lingered longer over his coffee just to hear her light footsteps in the hallway, the faint rustle of fabric as she moved about her work. Every small sound tethered him to something real. He wondered if she still feared him. She did. Maria had learned to time her cleaning schedules around his meetings, her presence ghost-like. Whenever he entered a room, she would lower her head, murmur a polite greeting, and vanish into the next corridor. the humiliation lingered in her body like an invisible bruise. She avoided mirrors because they reminded her of the moment her dignity had cracked beneath his gaze. She tried to convince herself that he had not meant it, that accidents happened even among the powerful, but fear was older than reason. She feared losing the job more than she feared him. Every paycheck meant medicine for her mother and rent for the family apartment in El Paso. Each time she knelt to scrub the marble floor, she whispered silent prayers that he would forget what had happened. But Adrian could not forget. The memory of her eyes, wide trembling innocent, had become a mirror reflecting everything he despised about himself. He saw in them the emptiness of his existence, the sterile perfection he had mistaken for control. He began noticing details he had never cared about. Before, the way she arranged the lilies slightly off-center, the way she hummed when she thought she was alone, the precise way she folded his shirts as if order could protect her from chaos. These observations disturbed him because they made her real, not just another function of his luxury. At the office, he snapped at colleagues without reason. During one board meeting, when a junior executive made a sexist remark about an assistant, Adrian's sudden cold fury stunned everyone. He dismissed the man on the spot. That night, alone in the penthouse, he realized he had defended someone who wasn't even there. The guilt had evolved into something else, a restless need to atone, though he didn't yet know how. Maria, meanwhile, was losing sleep. Each night she dreamed of that moment, the door opening, the shock on his face, the helplessness in hers. Sometimes she woke up in tears, ashamed of being ashamed. The job that once symbolized stability now felt like a test she was failing every day. Yet she still performed her duties flawlessly. When her manager praised her punctuality, she only nodded because the praise tasted hollow. In her heart, she felt like an intruder in her own life. One evening, while cleaning his office, she accidentally brushed against a framed photograph on his desk. It was a younger Adrian smiling beside another man. The smile startled her. It was human, unguarded, almost boyish. For a fleeting second, she imagined what he must have been before the world turned him into a monument of control. She placed the photo back carefully, unaware that Adrian had been standing at the doorway watching her. He saw the fear return to her shoulders the instant she realized he was there, and his stomach twisted. He wanted to tell her she was safe, but the words caught like stones in his throat. She hurried past him, whispering, "Good night, Mr. Cole." He stood there long after she was gone, the echo of her voice clinging to the air. Later in bed, he closed his eyes and heard that quiet apology again. "I'm sorry, sir," and felt the same sharp guilt lance through him. It was not lust. It was something far more unbearable, the recognition that he had power and power could wound without intent. Days bled into nights, and the haunting deepened. Even the city seemed complicit. Every siren, every flicker of neon outside his window reminded him of her solitude. He wondered what dreams she carried, what fears shaped her silence. In the rare moments they crossed paths, he caught glimpses of exhaustion in her eyes, and wanted to ask if she was all right, but she always slipped away before he could form the question. One morning she left a single white flower on his desk beside the financial reports. It was perfectly placed, unaccompanied by a note. He stared at it for a long time, feeling something he could not name. It was gratitude, maybe, or forgiveness, or perhaps an invitation to be human again. That night, he walked into the kitchen where she was quietly polishing silverware. She froze, waiting for an order, but he only said softly, "You can leave those for tomorrow." She nodded, eyes downcast, and hurried off. It was the first kindness he had offered her, and it unsettled them both. Alone again, Adrian realized the irony. He who commanded armies of engineers and investors was powerless before one small act of decency. The haunting was no longer external. It lived inside him, reshaping the architecture of his thoughts. He found himself reading about moral philosophy, about guilt and redemption subjects he had once dismissed as abstractions. He wanted to understand why this mattered so much. The answer, though unspoken, was simple, because for the first time in years, something mattered at all. The city moved relentlessly forward, yet Adrian Cole found himself circling the same memories, like a man trapped inside a loop of time. To understand why Maria's innocence haunted him, he had to face the ghosts he had long buried beneath ambition. His past was not a mystery, but a file of calculated decisions made to erase weakness. Years ago, before Coltech became a household name, there had been someone who saw him not as a machine, but as a man. Her name was Evelyn Hart, his first business partner, and the woman he had once believed he would marry. They had started together in a Brooklyn apartment, sharing ideas over instant noodles and cheap coffee. She had the gift of turning code into art and laughter into courage. But when investors arrived and millions were at stake, trust evaporated faster than loyalty. Evelyn sold confidential data to a rival company, justifying it as a survival move. The betrayal hit Adrian with surgical precision, cutting out the last part of him that still believed in faith and affection. After that, he built walls instead of bridges. He buried pain under precision and emotion under success. He learned that love was a variable too volatile for equations. When people called him the machine, he wore the name like armor. Years later, surrounded by glass walls and algorithms, he had almost forgotten that he was still human until a door opened to reveal a trembling girl clutching her shirt to her chest. That moment did not create his guilt, it exposed it. It forced him to see the man he had become efficient, cold, and incapable of gentleness. Now every time he thought of Maria, he remembered Evelyn's voice saying, "You care too deeply, Adrian. That's your flaw." Perhaps she had been right. Caring had cost him everything once, so he had amputated the ability altogether. But Maria's eyes had revived it, like an old wound aching before a storm. Somewhere across town, in a neighborhood far removed from luxury and logic, Maria Alvarez carried her own archive of pain. Her life in Texas had been ordinary until tragedy redrew its borders. Her father, a mechanic with calloused hands and a laugh that filled their small house, had died in a construction accident when she was 19. The compensation barely covered the funeral. Her mother, Alma, took 3 cleaning jobs to keep the family afloat. Maria dropped out of college, shelving dreams of becoming a teacher to work in diners and hotels. She learned early that silence was the safest armor for women like her. Words could be twisted, complaints punished, and kindness mistaken for invitation. In New York, she found employment through an agency that promised respectable homes and generous pay. The first household had been chaos children, screaming employers shouting. The second was worse, a man who looked at her too long when his wife was away. She quit without references, terrified but determined. Coltech's listing had seemed like salvation live-in position. High salary, no children, professional distance. And for months it had been exactly that. The penthouse was silent, orderly. predictable everything she thought safety looked like. She had grown comfortable in the rhythm of invisibility until the night Adrienne Cole opened her door. Since then, her reflection felt foreign, as if that one moment had stripped away her armor. She avoided eye contact with anyone, even on the subway, afraid that her shame showed on her face. Yet part of her refused to surrender to fear. She wrote in her small notebook each night, "One day I'll finish school. One day I'll teach again." She clung to that sentence like a prayer. Adrian never knew this about her. To him, she remained a figure of quiet efficiency, moving through his apartment like a ghost. But sometimes he wondered what silence cost her. He began to see her through fragments, the soft hum of Spanish lullabies she sang, while cleaning the calluses on her hands, the faint scar above her wrist, details that spoke of endurance. The more he saw, the heavier the guilt became, not because of what he had done, but because he had lived so long without seeing anyone at all. His world was built on transactions, buy, sell, acquire, optimize. Hers was built on survival, save, send, endure, hope. Two lives calibrated to different frequencies, yet somehow vibrating on the same note of loneliness. One night, as he reviewed old company records, he stumbled upon an archived video interview of himself during Coltech's early days. "What drives you?" the interviewer had asked. His younger self had smiled confidently. "Perfection," he had said. Watching that answer now felt like reading a confession of ignorance. Perfection had stolen his soul. He closed the laptop and stared at the skyline. Somewhere in this same city was Maria's family, struggling as his company climbed toward another billion in revenue. The imbalance made him sick. He remembered how Evelyn had once told him that guilt was only useful if it led to change. He had laughed, then arrogant, convinced he would never need redemption. Now the words felt prophetic. At the same hour, Maria was sitting by the window of her small room phone, pressed to her ear, whispering to her mother in Spanish. She promised she was fine, that New York was safe, that her employer was decent. Alma told her she prayed for her every night. Maria smiled through tears, watching the city glow like a sea of distant fires. When she hung up, she looked toward the closed door and thought of the man beyond it. She did not hate him. She pitied him, maybe even feared what pity might become if she let it. The next morning, Adrian crossed paths with her in the kitchen. The encounter lasted just enough for their eyes to meet. He saw exhaustion in hers. She saw remorse in his. Neither spoke. But in that silence their histories brushed like passing ghosts, two pasts wounded differently, yet bound by the same hunger for peace. Both carried scars no one could see, both pretending they did not ache. The city outside roared on indifferent, while inside the glass tower, two people from opposite worlds stood one heartbeat away from the possibility of understanding. The morning that changed everything began like any other. Adrian Cole woke before sunrise to the low hum of the city, the pale light spilling through his glass walls, painting faint gold on the marble. His life was routine, predictable, and utterly sterile. He showered, dressed, checked emails, and prepared to leave for another day of decisions that would affect thousands yet mean nothing to him. But today, something in him resisted the motion. Perhaps it was the restless night before haunted again by the memory of Maria's startled eyes, or perhaps it was the strange stillness that hung over the penthouse as if the air itself were waiting for something to break. He stepped into the kitchen to pour coffee and found her there quietly, arranging fruit on the counter. The moment she saw him, her hands faltered. A glass slipped, shattering against the floor. Water spread like a mirror, the fruit rolling away in small, quiet collisions. Maria gasped, dropping to her knees, gathering shards with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'll clean it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean." He froze. The sight of her crouched before him, apologizing for an accident that could have happened to anyone, sliced through the last layer of his detachment. He stepped forward instinctively. "Maria," he said, his voice lower, softer than it had ever been. "Stop. Are you hurt?" She blinked, confused by the question, as if it didn't belong in their shared vocabulary. "I'm fine," she stammered, withdrawing her hand, though a small line of blood marred her skin. Without thinking, Adrian reached for a cloth from the counter and crouched beside her. "You're bleeding," he murmured gently. Wrapping the cloth around her finger, she stared at him, too stunned to speak. This was not the man she feared, the one whose voice could cut like ice, whose presence demanded silence. This was someone else entirely, someone human. "It's just a scratch," she whispered. "I'll finish cleaning up." He shook his head. "Leave it. I'll have it handled." She hesitated, looking at him as if expecting anger to follow, but it didn't. The silence stretched between them until Adrian finally broke it, his voice rough. "About that night," he began. Her breath caught. Every muscle in her body tensed. "I owe you an apology, a real one." She lowered her gaze. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted, forcing himself to hold her eyes. "I walked into your room without knocking. I intruded on your privacy, and I saw something I had no right to see. That was my mistake, not yours. I can't undo it, but I need you to know I'm sorry for what it did to you." The confession startled even him. He hadn't planned to speak. It had simply broken out of the dam he had built around his guilt. Maria's lips parted, her voice barely audible. "Why are you saying this now?" "Because," he said quietly, "I can't stand the way you look at me, as if you're waiting for me to destroy you." Her eyes filled with tears she hadn't intended. "I was afraid," she whispered. "I thought you'd fire me. I thought you were angry." "I wasn't angry," he said. "I was ashamed." She blinked, uncertain she had heard right. "Ashamed?" He nodded, staring at the floor for a moment before meeting her gaze again. "Not because of you, because of me. Because in that second I realized how easy it is to hurt someone without meaning to, and how blind I've been to the people around me." "You didn't do anything wrong, Maria. I did." The words landed between them like fragile glass, delicate, honest, irrevocable. Maria swallowed hard. "I didn't think people like you could feel that way." Adrian let out a small, humorless laugh. "People like me? Maybe that's the problem. I've spent my life making sure I never had to feel anything. It worked until you." The admission startled her. "Me. You reminded me what innocence looks like," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "And I don't mean that in the way you might think. I mean you live with honesty, with care, even when no one sees you. That morning I didn't just see you undressing. I saw everything I lost, trying to become someone who couldn't be hurt." Maria didn't know what to say. His words cracked something inside her, a blend of empathy and confusion and fear. She wanted to believe him, but belief required trust, and trust had never been safe. Still, she whispered, "I don't understand you." "Neither do I," he admitted, "but I'm trying." For a long moment they simply looked at each other. The city stretched beyond them, distant and bright, but the kitchen felt like the center of the universe. two souls standing on the edge of something unknown. Finally, she nodded slowly, clutching the cloth around her finger. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saying it." He exhaled, tension leaving his shoulders. "You don't have to thank me, Maria. You deserve respect. I should have remembered that." She stood, hesitating. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," he said. "I want you to stay. You're good at what you do, and I promise you nothing like that will ever happen again." She believed him, though she didn't know why. Perhaps it was the way his voice trembled at the edges, or the raw sincerity in his eyes. Whatever it was, the fear that had defined her, every movement began to loosen its grip. For the first time since the accident, she breathed without flinching. When she left the kitchen, Adrian remained standing amid the broken glass and spilled fruit, his reflection fractured across the marble. He realized that for all his billions, for all his control, the only thing that had ever truly eluded him was redemption. And perhaps for the first time, he had taken one step toward it. Upstairs, Maria sat on her bed, holding the makeshift bandage, her thoughts a swirl of confusion and relief. The man she feared had become the man who apologized. The apartment felt different now, less like a cage, more like a question waiting to be answered. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this much. Something had shifted, and though neither of them could name it yet, it was the beginning of everything that would follow. In the days that followed, something subtle began to change inside the penthouse. It wasn't visible at first glance. The marble floors still gleamed, the glass walls still reflected the city skyline, but beneath the surface, the rhythm of the place had shifted. The silence, once heavy with fear and formality, softened into something almost human. Adrian Cole noticed it first in himself. He no longer rushed through the mornings with his usual mechanical precision. Instead, he lingered over the small details, the sound of the kettle, the faint scent of lemon polish that Maria always used, the quiet hum of her presence somewhere nearby. He began leaving his office door open, not as an invitation, but as a silent signal that the walls he had built were beginning to crack. Maria noticed too, though she didn't understand it. The man who once seemed carved from ice now paused before speaking, his voice carrying a hesitancy that made her uneasy. It was as though he was learning how to be gentle. One afternoon, when she set his lunch on the table, she found a note beside the plate in his sharp handwriting. "Thank you. The apartment looks peaceful lately." She read it twice, unsure if it was meant for her specifically, or if it was just his formal way of communicating. Still, the words lingered in her mind long after she folded the paper into her pocket. For Adrian, the note was an experiment, a small act of decency that felt strangely monumental. He didn't know why. He cared whether she saw it as kindness or obligation, only that it mattered that she did. Later that week, he noticed she looked pale, her usual composure worn thin. Without mentioning it, he quietly instructed his private chef to prepare warm meals for the household staff and ensure Miss Alvarez eats too. The chef had raised an eyebrow at the unusual request, but complied. Maria discovered the extra plate the next day, confused but grateful. "I didn't order this," she told the chef, who only shrugged and said, "Mr. Cole's orders." She hesitated before tasting it, the first real meal she'd had in days, and for the first time since she'd come to New York, she allowed herself to feel cared for, even if it came from the most unexpected source. In his own way, Adrian was learning to express remorse, not through apologies, but through action. He began scheduling fewer late meetings, taking short evening walks on the terrace, just to breathe air that wasn't conditioned through filters. On one such night, he found Maria standing near the edge of the rooftop garden, her face turned toward the skyline. She startled when she saw him clutching her cleaning rag like a shield. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be up here," she said quickly. He shook his head. "You're allowed. It's your home too, in a way." She blinked. "No, sir, it's yours." "Then it's far too big for one person," he said softly. She didn't reply, but didn't leave either. They stood side by side for a long while, saying nothing. The city glittered below them, like a galaxy of distant promises neither quite believed in. For Maria, that brief silence felt less like tension and more like fragile peace. She didn't know it, but for Adrian, that quiet moment became the closest thing to confession he had ever known. He began noticing her laughter, a sound so rare it startled him when he heard it one afternoon while she spoke on the phone in Spanish, probably to her family. The warmth in her tone pulled him out of his office. He stopped in the hallway, listening, smiling without realizing. That evening he found himself researching El Paso, scrolling through pictures of desert sunsets and old neighborhoods. He wanted to understand where she came from, not because it was relevant, but because it was her world, and he wanted to see it through her eyes. Meanwhile, Maria's fear of him began to erode, replaced by confusion she could not name. She caught glimpses of him sitting on the terrace after midnight, reading books instead of reports, his posture tired but human. Once, when she accidentally entered the study while he was there, he looked up and offered her a faint smile. "You can come in," he said. "I was just thinking." It wasn't an order, and that difference mattered. She nodded, dusted the bookshelves quietly, then left heart fluttering for reasons that scared her. She told herself it was gratitude, nothing more. But gratitude, she was beginning to learn, could bloom into something dangerous if left unchecked. Adrian, too, wrestled with feelings he couldn't categorize. Attraction wasn't the right word. It was too shallow for what he felt. It was reverence, maybe, admiration for someone whose simplicity exposed the hollowness of his achievements. He began holding back, from snapping at employees, from dismissing subordinates who failed to meet impossible standards. When his assistant noticed, she commented that he seemed different lately. He didn't deny it. That night, he sat at his desk long after midnight, writing her name on a piece of paper and staring at it until the letters blurred. Maria Alvarez. 2 words that had somehow become his conscience. The next morning, he found a small potted plant sitting on the kitchen counter. A note rested beside it, written in Maria's careful handwriting. "I thought the place could use something alive." He touched the leaves, feeling a strange warmth bloom in his chest. It wasn't love yet, but it was something close, something sacred. For the first time in his adult life, Adrian Cole didn't feel like the richest man in New York. He felt like a man rediscovering the meaning of being alive. The transformation of Adrian Cole and his silent home might have continued quietly unnoticed by the world, if not for the whispers that always follow power. In a city where gossip traveled faster than truth, even kindness could be mistaken for scandal. It began with something trivial, a building staff member noticing the CEO speaking gently to his maid, holding a door for her, lingering a little too long in conversation. By the end of the week, those details twisted into a story told with smirks. The billionaire and his maid the forbidden affair behind penthouse glass. Maria heard the rumor first. The housekeeper from the floor below stopped her in the lobby, curiosity masked as concern. "They say you're close with Mr. Cole," she said with a smile that wasn't kind. "You know how people talk." Maria froze, pulse quickening. "That's not true," she whispered. "It was an accident." The woman shrugged. "Accidents don't last this long, honey." That night, Maria couldn't eat. She sat on her narrow bed, staring at the city lights, and felt the walls closing in. She had worked so hard to rebuild her dignity after that night to exist without shame, and now the world was painting her with it again. She imagined her mother hearing the whispers, imagined her little brother reading them online, and nausea rose in her throat. When she entered the penthouse the next morning, she felt every gaze, every whisper of the staff as she passed. It was as if invisible hands were stripping her of the respect she had so carefully earned. Adrian noticed the tension before he knew the cause. He arrived home earlier than usual and found Maria cleaning the same counter for the 5th time, her hands trembling. "Maria," he said quietly, "what's wrong?" She flinched at the sound of his voice. "Nothing, sir. Don't lie to me," he said, not sharply, but with concern. She hesitated, then finally blurted out, "They're saying things about me, about us, about what happened that night." Her words hung heavy between them. Adrian's jaw tightened. Who the staff? Maybe others. "I don't know." She swallowed hard. "I didn't do anything wrong, Mr. Cole. I swear." His voice softened. "I know you didn't, but it wasn't enough." She stepped back, shaking her head. "You don't understand. They'll believe it because you're powerful, and I'm just—" She stopped herself, unable to finish. Just what he asked, just the help she whispered. The words hit him like a blow. He had never thought of her that way, but he knew the world would. "This will stop," he said firmly. "I'll make sure of it." "Please don't," she said quickly. "If you defend me, they'll think it's true." "Then let them," he snapped. "I don't care what they think." "But I do," she said, her voice breaking. "Because I can't survive it again." The look in her eyes, a mixture of fear and exhaustion, made his chest ache. She bowed her head. "I think I should leave." "No," he said immediately. "You can't. You've done nothing wrong." "That doesn't matter," she replied quietly. "People like me don't get to stay when the story turns ugly." He wanted to argue, to promise her safety, but the truth was brutal. She was right. The world would protect him long before it ever protected her. That night he sat in his office, staring at the skyline, fury and helplessness twisting inside him. Every attempt to fix things in his life had always been transactional money power control. But this wasn't a problem to solve. It was a wound that couldn't be bought away. When his phone rang the next morning, it was his PR director, her voice clipped and cautious. "Adrian, there's a rumor circulating about you and a household employee. We've been fielding calls from the press. It's nothing concrete yet, but I suggest you handle it quietly." Handle it. He almost laughed at the word, as if human pain were something to manage like bad press. That afternoon, he called a meeting with the building's management, demanding the source of the gossip. The superintendent, nervous and sweating, admitted that a security officer had mentioned something after overhearing a conversation. Adrian's voice turned ice. "Fire him. Sir, that might escalate." "Then escalate it," Adrian said. "But no one disrespects Miss Alvarez." The next morning, the entire building knew. His attempt to protect her had done exactly what she'd feared. It made the story explode. Maria came to work, to find every whisper louder, every stare more piercing. When she entered the penthouse, her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the breakfast tray. Adrian met her gaze, remorse burning behind his calm expression. "I tried to fix it," he said quietly. "I made it worse." Tears welled in her eyes. "You didn't mean to, but you did." "Tell me how to make it right," he said, stepping closer. "You can't," she whispered. "You're the storm, Mr. Cole. Even when you're trying to help, you destroy everything in your path." She set the tray down and turned away, her breath trembling. "I'm leaving. I'll find another job. Please don't try to stop me." "Maria, please no." She said, her voice small but steady. "You once told me I deserve respect. Let me have that now. Let me walk away." She left the room before he could respond, leaving behind a silence that felt like collapse. Hours later, he found her letter on the kitchen counter, her neat handwriting shaking slightly. "Thank you for everything. I don't blame you, I just need peace." He read it 3 times before folding it carefully, as if folding it could undo the pain. That night, the penthouse felt like a mausoleum. He wandered from room to room, every corner echoing with absence. Her scent lingered faintly in the air, a ghost he couldn't banish. For the first time in his life, Adrian Cole felt powerless, not because he'd lost control, but because he had lost someone who made control meaningless. He sat by the window until dawn, watching the city wake his reflection pale against the glass. Somewhere out there, Maria Alvarez was free of him, but the emptiness she left behind was the price of every wall he had ever built. And though he told himself she was safer far away, the truth gnawed at him. With relentless precision, he had tried to protect her, and in doing so had hurt her again. The morning after Maria left, Adrian Cole awoke to a silence that was no longer peaceful, but accusing. The penthouse that once symbolized his success now felt like a tomb built of glass and guilt. Every trace of her remained: the plant on the counter, the faint scent of soap, the folded linens that would never be touched again. He tried to work, but numbers meant nothing. His inbox filled with messages from his PR team, from investors demanding explanations, from tabloids chasing scandal, yet none of it mattered. For the first time in his life, Adrian didn't care about salvaging his image. He cared only about the woman who had seen him not as a CEO, but as a flawed man. Days turned into weeks. He told himself to let her go, that she deserved the peace she'd asked for. But the guilt didn't fade. It deepened into something unbearable. He began having nightmares of her voice, calling his name, of her eyes wide, with fear of himself standing powerless as she disappeared into the city's endless crowd. Eventually, he could no longer endure the hollow echo of his conscience. Redemption wasn't about words. It was about pursuit, not to possess, but to make right what he had broken. He started by calling the employment agency that had placed her, only to be told she had terminated her contract. No forwarding address. He contacted every staff member who might have known her whereabouts. Most didn't, but one remembered hearing that her mother was ill in Texas. Adrian chartered a flight to El Paso the next day, leaving behind his empire without a word to anyone. The desert heat greeted him with a stark honesty that New York never had. He followed a paper trail of small details: a bank transfer she'd made to a hospital, a purchase at a grocery store, a registered donation under her name at a local church. It led him not to a grand revelation, but to a modest neighborhood where cracked sidewalks and faded murals told stories of survival. He found her mother first, Alma Alvarez, a weary woman with kind eyes and a face lined by both hardship and grace. She looked at the stranger in her doorway with suspicion until he introduced himself quietly. "My name is Adrian Cole," he said. "I used to employ your daughter." Her expression shifted from confusion to guarded recognition. "You're that man," she said carefully. "The one from the city." He nodded, shame tightening in his chest. "Yes, I came because I need to make things right." Alma studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Right is a big word, Mr. Cole. You can't buy it." "I'm not here to buy anything," he said softly. "I just want to help." She hesitated, then motioned for him to sit. Inside the house was small but warm, filled with the scent of home-cooked food and fading photographs. Alma poured him tea, her hands steady despite her fatigue. "Maria isn't here," she said finally. "She left for New York again. Said she found work at a community center, teaching English to kids. She said she wanted to help people who come from nothing." Adrian exhaled, part relief, part heartbreak. "She's back in New York, yes, but not your world anymore, Mr. Cole. She's building her own." He nodded, gratitude mingled with regret. Before leaving, he paid the hospital bill Alma had been quietly struggling with and donated anonymously to the local shelter where Maria had once volunteered. It wasn't redemption, but it was a beginning. Back in New York, Adrian sought her quietly. He didn't send flowers or gifts. He simply found the community center where she worked and waited outside one afternoon. Through the window, he saw her surrounded by children, her expression calm, her laughter unguarded. She was radiant in a way she had never been under his roof. He almost turned away, believing that intruding now would be selfish. But then she looked up and saw him. Their eyes met through the glass, two worlds colliding again, but this time without shame. When she stepped outside, she didn't speak right away. Neither did he. Finally she said, "You shouldn't be here." "I know," he replied, "but I had to see you." Why, she asked, not angrily, but with quiet curiosity. He hesitated, then said, "Because I owed you something more than an apology." "You were right, Maria. I destroy things when I try to control them. But this isn't control. This is me trying to give you back the choice I took from you." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He handed her a folder. Official documents stamped with the Coltech logo. "This is a proposal. We're launching a new outreach division, a program to help underprivileged students access technology and education. I want you to run it. It's paid well, and it includes a full scholarship if you ever decide to return to school." She stared at the papers, then at him. "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a chance," he said gently. "And not because you need it, but because you earned it. You've done more good with so little than most people do with everything. And if I say no, then I'll walk away," he said. "No questions, no persuasion. You don't owe me anything." Maria looked at him for a long moment, the wind tugging softly at her hair. "Why are you really doing this?" He met her gaze, unflinching. "Because when I lost you, I realized that what haunted me wasn't guilt anymore. It was the memory of someone who reminded me how to be human. And I don't want to live another day pretending I'm not." She swallowed hard, torn between caution and compassion. Part of her wanted to refuse to protect the fragile peace she'd built. But something in his eyes, honesty, exhaustion, hope disarmed her. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "That's all I ask," he replied. When he turned to leave, she called after him, "Mr. Cole." He paused. "You look different," she said. "Less untouchable." He smiled faintly. "That's because I stopped trying to be perfect. That evening, she sat alone in the quiet center, reading through the proposal. It wasn't just a job offer, it was a gesture of respect, of belief of something pure. The next morning, she signed the papers. For the first time since that terrible night, she felt like her life was her own again. And for Adrian Cole, somewhere across the city, the weight he had carried for so long finally began to lift. Redemption had found its way not through grand gestures or wealth, but through humility, honesty, and the courage to let another soul heal where his had failed. The day of the official launch for the community program dawned clear and golden sunlight spilling over the skyline like redemption itself. For the first time in months, Adrian Cole woke with something that felt like purpose. The event would be small but meaningful: teachers, volunteers, donors, and the very students the initiative aimed to help. And at the center of it all was Maria Alvarez, now the program coordinator, a title that seemed both impossibly new and perfectly right. He hadn't seen her much since she accepted the position. They had exchanged emails, brief, professional updates, a few quiet messages that always stopped just short of something personal. He wanted to give her space to build her own life, but part of him had counted the days to this moment. When he arrived, the venue, a refurbished library in Queens, was alive with the sound of children laughing and pages turning. The scent of paper and coffee replaced the sterile tang of his office. It felt real, alive, human. And then he saw her. She stood by the podium, sunlight catching in her dark hair, her posture steady, confident. The shy maid who once avoided his gaze was gone. In her place stood a woman, grounded in her worth. For a moment, he simply watched her pride and awe tangling in his chest. Maria noticed him then, and their eyes met across the room. It wasn't shock or tension. This time it was understanding, warm and quiet. She excused herself from a conversation and approached him. "Mr. Cole," she greeted, her tone respectful but softer than before. "You made it. I wouldn't miss it," he said, smiling faintly. "It's your day after all." "It's not mine," she corrected gently. "It's theirs." She gestured toward the children gathered at the reading tables. "They're why this matters." He nodded, watching the kids with her. "You did this," he said quietly. "No," she replied. "We did." The simplicity of her words cut through him like light through glass. They walked together through the event, exchanging polite words with guests, laughing at small things. It felt effortless, as though the months of distance had distilled everything into clarity. During her speech, he stood at the back of the room listening. Her voice was calm and sincere as she spoke about opportunity, compassion, and the power of being seen. "When I first came to this city," she said, "I thought invisibility was safety. That if I stayed small, quiet, obedient life would leave me alone. But kindness, even when it's messy or misunderstood, has a way of finding you. It changes you. It teaches you that dignity isn't something others grant you. It's something you claim." Her words stirred something deep inside him. For a brief second, she glanced his way, and he saw gratitude there, not for the job, not for the money, but for the chance to reclaim herself. When the applause faded and the crowd dispersed, she found him outside under the canopy of evening light. The city hummed beyond the park fence, alive with its usual indifference, but here the world felt smaller, more deliberate. "That was beautiful," he said. "You always had a gift for truth." She smiled. "I learned from someone who finally stopped hiding from his own." They stood in silence, the weight between them lighter than it had ever been. Finally, she asked, "Do you ever miss it? The control, the quiet." "Every day," he admitted, "but I miss her more." "Her," she repeated, confused. "The person I was before I stopped seeing people as people," he said. "You brought that man back." Maria looked at him, her eyes soft. "I didn't bring him back. You just finally opened the door." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she stepped closer, voice almost a whisper. "You kept your promise." "Which one? You said you'd never make me afraid again," she said. "And you haven't." The simplicity of it unraveled him. He reached for her hand slowly, as if asking permission, and when she didn't pull away, he let their fingers intertwine. Her hand was small but steady, warm, against his own cold certainty. "I don't know what happens next," he said honestly. "I've spent my whole life building futures for others, but never one that wasn't a transaction." "Maybe this one doesn't have to be," she said softly. "Maybe it's not about owing or earning anymore. Maybe it's just about being." He smiled faintly. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," she said, meeting his gaze, "but it's worth trying." They stood like that for a while, two silhouettes against the fading city light. The space between them finally filled with peace instead of guilt. When she left that evening, she turned back once, her smile lingering like a promise. For the first time, Adrian didn't feel the need to chase or control it. He knew the kind of love that mattered wasn't about possession. It was about recognition, about choosing each other freely after everything had been broken and rebuilt. Weeks passed. They continued to work together, professionally, carefully. But beneath the surface, something deeper flowed, unspoken but undeniable. She brought life into every meeting, every project. He brought steadiness and belief. Together they turned the outreach program into something greater than either had imagined, a bridge between worlds that rarely touched. One night, after a long fundraiser event, they found themselves alone in the quiet library. The lights were dim, the city outside glowing like 1,000 distant fires. She was stacking books. He was gathering notes. "You've done good work," he said quietly. "So have you," she replied. "You don't look like the man I met a year ago." "I'm not," he said. "You changed me." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You let yourself be changed." He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking. "Maria," he said softly, "if I told you that I think about you more than I should, would that ruin everything we've built?" She looked up, her eyes steady. "Only if you meant it as an apology." He exhaled, almost laughing. "No, I mean it as the truth." Her lips curved into a small smile. "Then I think you've finally learned how to say things that matter." He reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. His touch tentative, reverent. She didn't move away. "And if I kissed you now?" he asked quietly. She smiled faintly. "Then it wouldn't be an accident this time." He leaned in slowly, not out of urgency but out of gratitude. And when their lips met, it was gentle and unhurried, the closing of a circle that had begun in fear and ended in forgiveness. Outside, the city kept its rhythm, unaware that somewhere within it, two broken souls had finally found the courage to be whole. 1 year later, the city that had once been nothing more than steel and noise for Adrian Cole had changed. Or perhaps it was he who had changed, finally able to see beyond the glass. The skyline of New York shimmered through the late spring haze, alive and imperfect, and the penthouse that had once been a monument to isolation now breathed with quiet warmth. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had unfolded slowly, Like dawn creeping across darkened streets, Maria Alvarez still woke early, as she always had, though her mornings no longer began with fear. She made coffee in the kitchen that now smelled faintly of cinnamon instead of sterile polish. The air was different, softer, filled with the faint sounds of a life being lived. On the counter sat the same potted plant she had brought a year ago now, lush and sprawling, its leaves catching the morning sun. Adrian entered the kitchen, barefoot, a rare sight once unimaginable. He wore no suit, no armor, only a faded shirt, and a piece she had never seen on him before. "You're up early," he said, voice still husky with sleep. "Habit," she replied, smiling over her shoulder. "Some things never change, some things do," he said, gently stepping closer, brushing a kiss against her temple. It wasn't grand or cinematic, it was domestic, ordinary, the kind of gesture that meant home. They had not defined what they were to each other, not officially, not publicly. But in the privacy of their quiet mornings, labels didn't matter. They had built something steadier than romance, partnership, trust, redemption. After the scandal faded, after Coltec adjusted to its new direction, the world had stopped watching them. People moved on to fresher stories. That anonymity was a gift, one they both guarded. Together they had turned the outreach program into a foundation, the Second Chances Initiative, funded not just by Adrian's wealth, but by his active involvement. He visited schools, spoke to young entrepreneurs, donated computers to underserved communities. The man who once worshipped perfection now sought purpose. Maria, meanwhile, thrived in her role mentoring women who had been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated. She taught them what she had learned through fire, that dignity wasn't given, it was reclaimed. In her, Adrian saw the light that had saved him from the man he once was. Sometimes when she spoke at events, he stood at the back of the room as he had the first time, listening with quiet pride. Afterward, she would tease him gently. "You don't have to hide," she'd say. "You're part of this too." "I prefer the view from back here," he'd reply, smiling. "You shine better without my shadow." The apartment reflected their evolution. The once sterile living room now bore signs of life books scattered on tables, framed photos of community projects, a throw blanket draped lazily over the couch. The minimalist design hadn't changed, but the energy had. It was no longer a showroom for success, but a sanctuary for truth. On quiet evenings, Maria would play soft Spanish guitar from her phone while she cooked, and Adrian would sit at the counter, reading aloud from whatever book she had left open. Sometimes he'd stop mid-sentence just to watch her move, and she'd roll her eyes, saying, "If you keep staring, the food will burn." "Then let it," he'd reply, and she'd laugh, shaking her head. Yet beneath their peace lingered the weight of the journey that had brought them here. The guilt, the mistakes, the unspoken scars. One night, rain lashed against the windows, thunder rolling through the city, like an old memory. They sat together on the couch, her legs curled beneath her, his arm resting along the back. The storm's rhythm carried them into silence until Maria finally spoke. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. He turned to her. "The day I walked into your room," she nodded, eyes distant. "Sometimes I wonder if it hadn't happened, if we'd still be here." He considered this carefully. "Maybe not," he admitted. "Maybe I'd still be trapped inside myself. Maybe you'd still be afraid to take up space. But then again, maybe the point isn't what happened. It's what we chose to do after. Do you forgive yourself for it?" she asked. He looked down at their intertwined hands. "I'm learning to," he said. Some days are harder than others. Forgiveness isn't a destination, she said softly. It's a daily decision. He smiled faintly. You sound like you've forgiven me. I did, she said, a long time ago. But not for you, for me. I couldn't keep carrying it. And now I think, maybe that's what love is. Not pretending it never hurt, but choosing to keep walking anyway. He brushed his thumb along her hand. Then I'll keep walking beside you. The storm outside eased, leaving only the soft patter of rain on glass. They sat like that for a long time, the city shimmering through the haze, their reflections merging in the window, no longer captor and captive, no longer guilt and innocence, but two souls remade by understanding. Months later, their work took them across the country, Los Angeles, Chicago, Dallas, each trip, strengthening the quiet bond between them. In every new place, Adrian marveled at how she carried warmth wherever she went, how she connected with strangers through kindness, how she reminded him that leadership wasn't dominance, but compassion. And Maria marveled at how he had changed. The man who once commanded silence now listened more than he spoke, who once feared imperfection now embraced the messiness of being alive. One evening back in New York, they hosted a small gathering for the Foundation's anniversary. The penthouse glowed with laughter and soft music. Colleagues mingled, donors chatted, children from the first scholarship program played near the balcony. In the midst of it all, Maria stood beside Adrian, wearing a simple white dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. You did it, she whispered. We did it, he corrected. She smiled, then looked around. It's strange, isn't it? The same walls, but it feels like a different world. That's because it is, he said. Later, when the guests had gone and the city lights shimmered like constellations, they stood together by the window, the same spot where a frightened girl and a broken man had once stood worlds apart. Do you remember what you told me the first time you apologized? She asked. He frowned slightly. That I was ashamed, no. She said, smiling faintly. You said you saw in me everything you'd lost. He nodded slowly. I did, and I still do. You were wrong, she said gently. You didn't lose it. It was just waiting for you to notice. Her words sank deep, dissolving the last trace of guilt that had ever clung to him. He turned toward her, resting his forehead against hers. You taught me how to see again, he whispered. And you taught me that innocence isn't something fragile. It's something strong enough to save a life. They stood there in silence, the night air humming softly through the city. The light from the apartment spilled out across the glass, reflecting in the window like a beacon. It wasn't the cold light of power or wealth anymore. It was the warm, living light of forgiveness and home. Maria pulled back slightly, eyes glistening. So this is it, she said softly. Our second chance? No, he said with a small smile. Our first real beginning. She laughed quietly, resting her head against his shoulder as the city pulsed below them. In another life, they might have been strangers passing each other on the subway, or names on different pages of the same newspaper. But fate, clumsy, painful, miraculous fate, had written them into the same story. And though that story had begun with a mistake, it ended here in light. Outside, dawn began to rise, over the skyline spilling gold across the glass, catching on the leaves of the old potted plant, still thriving by the window. Adrian reached out, touching the frame as if to steady himself in the present. The first time I saw you, I thought I'd broken something pure, he murmured. Maria looked up at him, eyes luminous. You didn't break it, Adrian, she said softly. You just learned to see it. He smiled, kissed her gently, and for the first time in his life, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. The light in the apartment glowed steady and warm. Long after the city went to sleep, a quiet testament to what love could heal when two hearts dared to forgive the past and begin again. Before you go, take a deep breath and think about what this story meant to you. Was it just a story about a billionaire and a maid? Or was it something deeper, about the way we all carry guilt, the way we all crave redemption, the way one act of kindness can change the course of two entire lives? Maybe you saw yourself in Adrian trying to atone for mistakes you can't undo. Maybe you saw yourself in Maria doing your best to survive in a world that doesn't always see you learning to forgive, not because others deserve it, but because your heart does. And maybe, just maybe, you saw how love isn't about perfection or power, but about the courage to stay when everything inside you wants to run. If this story made you feel something, hope, forgiveness, even just a quiet ache, don't let that feeling fade. Let it remind you that love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it walks softly disguised as understanding, as the willingness to look at another soul and say, "I see you." That's what Emma's Stories is all about, seeing people, seeing love, seeing redemption, where the world only sees failure. So before you scroll away, I want to ask you something. Do you believe that two broken people can truly heal each other? If you do, type "I believe in second chances" in the comments. I read every single one, and it means more than you know. Tell me what part of Adrian and Maria's story spoke to you the most. Was it his apology, her strength, or that final light in the apartment that symbolized forgiveness? Share your thoughts, your favorite lines, your own stories of healing and hope. Your words might be the light someone else needs tonight. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Emma's Stories so you never miss another cinematic love story like this one. Every week I share tales of redemption, courage, and connection stories that remind us that love in all its messy, imperfect beauty is still the most powerful force in the world. And if you've been here for a while, thank you for being part of this growing family that believes in stories with heart. The next one is already on the way, and it's one you won't forget. But for now, let's stay here a little longer in this moment, in this light. Because in the end, that's what we all want, isn't it? To be seen, to be forgiven, to be loved not for who we pretend to be, but for who we really are. So drop a comment, share this story with someone who needs hope. And remember, every ending can be a beginning when love chooses to see you. Till next time, this is Emma's Stories. Thank you for watching, for believing, and for letting love find its way back home.